This presentation is about how to get published, specifically how to get your book written and published. I call it the ABCs of successful writing. Originally, this was presented at the Dallas Area Writers Group meeting. This is Alan Elliott, and welcome to this talk that's already in progress.
So what am I going to teach you today or talk to you about today is I'm going to teach you to do magic. And magic is poof. One more time. Hopefully that's the end of it. You'll get lots of money. Well, maybe not, but it takes a lot of hard work. So that's sort of what the topic is going to be today. The first thing you have to do is you have to realize that writing is a business, whether you're doing traditional publishing, which means that you get a publisher to publish your book for you, or you do self-publishing, which means you pay the cost to have your book published. Either way, it is a business. And if you're going to be successful at it, you really have to treat it as a business. You know, it's a little bit like learning how to play the piano or becoming a singer or any kind of really artistic endeavor. Writing is an artistic endeavor, and it takes the same kind of long-term strategy to learn how to do it. Of course, anybody can walk up to a piano, you know, and go bang, 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 and it's, you know, you make some music, quote. But if you're going to play Chopin, then it takes a lot more than that. And so almost anyone can write a paragraph or a sentence or even a story. But if you're going to write something of substance that someone's going to want to publish or someone's going to want to buy, then you have to have a business plan. So we'll go look at the ABCs of this. The A is that you need to learn about the business of writing. And one way to do that is to scour bookstores. That's what I do. Or Amazon or other kinds of places where you see books. Libraries would be another example. The thing about libraries is libraries have books from all eras. Whereas if you go to a bookstore, they're going to have mostly current books. If you're going to get a book published, you really want to know more about what books are being published right now so that you can see if your idea sort of fits into that market. Then you have to write your book, and oftentimes you have to slant your idea, and I'll talk about that a little bit more later, to match what's needed in the marketplace. In other words, a book that worked 50 years ago would not necessarily work today. Even a book that worked 10 years ago may not work today. So because the marketplace changes, people's values change, people's desires for what they want to read changes. So you have to slant your book. The next thing you need to do is you need to be prepared to submit. Be smart and relentless about sending out your book. If you're going to, particularly if you're going to do traditional publishing, that means that you're going to write something. Then you have to ask somebody, is this good enough to write? And when people ask, what does it take to write? I often tell them there's the 3 Ps. It's patience, perseverance, and persistence. Okay, so let's get into it a little bit. So a preliminary step is let me just, you know, all I can tell you is what I did and what has worked for me. It's going to be different with different writers. You know, the writer who makes the big headlines is the 18-year-old who sat down and wrote a novel and sold 1 million of them. Those are very few and far between. The vast majority of writers do something like what I'm going to describe here. And I've heard other people talk about doing this. And when I began writing, I actually lived in DeKalb, Georgia. And DeKalb had how they pronounce it, I forgot. But they had a library there. And I was going to graduate school. And so, as you know, sometimes during graduate school, you have weeks off or the summer off or something like that. And so I spent a lot of time at the library, and they had a shelf probably as long as one of these rows here of books about writing. So I just decided, okay, I'll just read all of them. So I read all of the books in that library about writing, except the ones about romance novels. I didn't particularly care about that. So I got a good idea to begin with. That's before I wrote really any. I guess I was writing a little bit during that time, but really I was getting a foundation in what it took to write. So once you have an idea about what you want to write, then you have to figure out, does anybody want this book? And one of the easiest ways to do this, and I did this, I remember doing this, particularly with this book here that I may talk about a little bit, called A Daily Dose of the American Dream. I had an idea for this book, and I wondered who would want to publish this. And so I went to Barnes and Noble, and I found a shelf that I thought this book would be on. And I looked at the publishers, and I saw two publishers that published books of this sort that I sort of liked. And I sent my proposal, which we'll talk about later, off to these two. Well, I don't know, maybe there are about 5 or 6 publishers. Anyway, I sent proposals to these, and 2 of them liked it and wanted to publish it. So the thing you want to do is find out who publishes this kind of book. Would they be interested in my book? And then figure out how to get in touch with them. Okay, so the next, Wesley, the next slide. So first, we're going to talk about traditional publishing. Now, I alluded earlier, there's traditional publishing and there's self-publishing. I'm going to talk about both, but first, let's talk about traditional publishing. In traditional publishing, because I find when I go to conferences and things like this, the questions always come up that people don't really understand what this means. In traditional publishing, you send your book to them and they pay to get it published. They, maybe to New York or Chicago or something like that. They have their own editors, their own designers. They do all of the stuff that they need to get your book looking like this. I didn't choose this cover. I didn't design this cover or anything. I wrote the inside. That's all I did. So it was traditionally published. They pay you, by the way. So they pay you. You don't pay them. They pay you some money. They're saying they will say, "Hey, this looks like a good book. We're going to give you some money so nice. We can publish this book, and then later on, we're going to give you royalties if it sells." So the publishers make your book ready for retailers like Barnes and Noble and Amazon and things like that. They do some marketing. Typically, their marketing is they have a sales force. They go out to Barnes and Noble and other places. Their sales force, they have. Maybe they have a particular publisher has 30 or 40 books that come out, and they'll say, "Hey, we got these 30 or 40 books. Let me briefly describe them to you." So they go to a big meeting and try to sell them to the bookstores like that. So you have somebody selling your book. They're not going to pay you to take a whirlwind book signing tour across the United States unless they paid you $1 million advance or something. But regardless of what they do, some of the promotion has to be for you. So I do book signings. I go and speak at places and stuff and sell books. And so there are a variety of things that I do. I've been on the radio, I've been on TV promoting books, all those kinds of things that author is somewhat expected to do. And nowadays, depending on what kind of book you have, you may be sort of expected to be online. You may need to have a platform online, which I'll talk about a little later, so people can find you so they know what kind of things you're going to do. Now, let's talk about advances and royalties, because I said they will pay you. So typically the payment is in two ways. First of all, they say, "Hey, we want to publish your book. We're going to give you $1,000 or $10,000 advance." What that means is we're going to give you this. Typically, it's in 3 pieces. We're going to give you some money now, some money when you turn in your draft, and the third amount when we finally say everything is okay and we're fixing to publish. Anyway, they're going to give you some money. And then later, there's something called royalties. And all of us have heard that word. But what that means is if they paid me $10,000 in advance and I get royalties, and let's say I get 5 or 10% of the cover, maybe $1 or $2 or $3 or whatever, then to make it easy, let's say they pay me $1,000 in advance and I get $1. The royalty is $1 per book. They have to sell 1,000 books before they send me any more money. The advance is an advancement against royalties. So you have to make up that amount before they send you extra money. So what most authors like to talk about is they like to sell through their royalties. So they want to sell through their royalties, so they're starting to get sell through their advance, so they're starting to get real royalties. Now, royalties can be based on the net, gross, list price, all sorts of things. I would tend to want to have a lawyer or an agent look at that to make sure it's in your favor. Typically, you want royalties based on the net price. I mean, on the list price, not net. Okay, so why target your book? I mentioned some of it already, but if your book, so let me go back to Barnes and Noble for a minute. If your book does not fit onto a shelf somewhere in Barnes and Noble, they won't know how to buy it because they don't know where to put it. So it sounds silly, but if they don't know where to put your book, they're not going to buy it because they have a pretty rigid structure. These are the romances. This is Texas history. These are the self-help books, et cetera, et cetera. Where does your book go? If you say, oh, well, it's a unique book. No one's ever published a book like this before. They'll say, so long, because they don't know how to sell it. Because when people come in, they want a self-help book, they go to the self-help spot, you know. So you have to target your book to that because one, the seller won't publish it. I mean, the publisher won't publish it. The bookstores won't sell it, and people won't even know how to find you online. So if you get it published and people search for it, if it's a unique book no one's ever heard about, how are they going to find it on Amazon? You know, if they don't know where to search. If they don't search self-help or history or mystery or whatever, they won't know how to find it. So now this is not true on every book, but on a lot of books, particularly on nonfiction books, you'll notice up in the upper corner of the back, you'll see, and I have it sort of blown up there, and so this is the book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. You've probably heard of this book. So notice up there at the very top, it says self-help, psychology, inspirational. That's where it fits. So it could fit in any of those 3 places, probably self-help. That's the first one that's listed. So a lot of times, particularly a nonfiction book, you'll see this designation on the back cover at the top somewhere. Now, if it's a romance novel, you're going to have a man and a woman half naked on the front kissing. They know that's a romance novel. Okay, so there's other tips. Or if it's a Western, you know, you're going to have a cowboy, you know. So those aren't hard, but nonfiction books tend to have this kind of designation. Okay, so let's look at just briefly the different kinds of writing then. We have, and I've already there's some probably other ones you could fit in this, but we have fiction and nonfiction. Fiction is a made-up story. Nonfiction is a true story. You have children's books and you have adult books. Typically, children's books are gauged from 0 to 18. Those are called kid literature or children's book. Even though an 18-year-old may not be a kid anymore, it's still, that's the designation they use. An adult book then is about 18 and up. So those are the 2 designations. And then the terms I mentioned, traditional means the publisher pays you to publish the book. Self-publish means that you bear the cost of publishing and promoting that book. All right, so let's look at a particular kind. I'm used to picture books. This is, I've got a camera here for a second, but this is a picture book that I published with Pelican called Willie the Texas Longhorn. And this is a typical children's book. It's 32 pages. There's all sorts of things that you have to know about publishing a children's book before you write one, but this is a quote from an agent. She wants whimsical, lyrical, surprising, and humorous stories that young readers will beg to read over and over again. That's a good definition of what people are looking for, what publishers are looking for, typically for a picture book essential. You need to know that. You need to know that it's 0 to 500 words. If you write a 1,200 word picture book, nobody's going to look at it because 500 words is about them. Occasionally 600-700 words, but almost always 0 to 500 words. Now, if it's a nonfiction, like it's a biography of someone, it may go up to 1,000, but rarely over that. Also, and I'm going to bring this up in a minute, but in order to know how to write a picture book, you need to join in with other people who do that. And there's a group called the SCBWI, which stands for the Society of Children's Books Writers and Illustrators. And it has a book, if you can see up there, go back to the other one, Wesley, the one called The Book. So almost everything I'm talking to you about is covered in the book. So this is a book you get when you join that particular group. Other groups have similar books, but it goes through the entire gamut of how to write a book, how to submit a book, what to expect, and things like that. One question a lot of people always ask when they're, I want to write a children's book, but I don't have an illustrator. Well, I didn't have an illustrator. I wrote the words. I sent the words to the publisher and they chose the illustrator. So 98% of the time, if you're just a writer, then the publisher is going to choose your illustrator for you. Now, there are some writer illustrators. They will write and illustrate the book, but very rarely does a writer plus a different person who's an illustrator ever come together and say, hey, this is our book. Typically, because anyway, that's just how it works. In order to know how to write a picture book, you need to have a critique group. And this is true for any kind of writing. You need a critique group is where 4 or 5 people get together, maybe 8, and you read each other's work and you critique them. You say, I really like that story, but the character of Maud was unbelievable, or the character of Maud seemed a little too nice to me, or something like that. So you learn what other people are thinking about your work. It's hard to have somebody critique your work, but that's how things improve. You also network at conferences. Now, we know that in the last 18 months, there hadn't been a whole lot of conferences, but if we ever get back to them, the conference I typically go to for the children's book writers, the big conference is in LA, it's about 3,000 people. And there's lots of editors, lots of publishers, lots of other writers. And so you can meet people and hobnob with them and find out how things are going. Okay, let's go to the next one then. So the types of fiction. So we're talking about fiction right now. And picture books, as I mentioned, are 0 to 500 words. A novel can be up to 100,000 words. Now, somebody say, well, what kind of pages is that? Well, you typically on a normal typewritten page, double space is 250 words per page. So if you're more of a page counter, you can count and see how many pages of typed things that is. For children's books, which again I'm most familiar with, typically they're broken down into several ways. Picture books, which is this. This is about 300 words. So this is 0 to 500 words, or maybe a little bit more. A chapter book, which you may have seen, is a little bit, has fewer pictures in it. It's more like a little bitty novel, and it's typically 3,000 to 5,000 words or 10,000 words, something like that. Then you have something called a middle grade novel. Now, this is a novel for kids up to about age 12. And the protagonist in the picture book tends to not be over 12 years old. And that would be, Harry Potter would be an example of that. Now, Harry Potter broke the mold because it is way bigger than 30,000 to 50,000 words. Most middle grade novels are that. And then a YA novel, I say here, age up to 13 to 18. So if you go above 12, then now you're getting into what would be called a YA or young adult novel. Somebody asked me, what's the difference between a middle grade and a young adult novel? This is a little crude, but what they said is, in a middle grade novel, kids are thinking about sex, and in a young adult novel, they're doing it. So that's, if you really want to know, go out there and read a few of them, you'll see that's exactly what's going on. There's a little bit of romance, if there's a kiss in a middle grade novel, it's one quick kiss on the cheek or something, it's very little, but YA novels nowadays are whatever you want, for good or bad. So let's go to the next one. So let's talk a little bit about adult books then. Commercial books. So there tends to be always 2 things, but there's usually more. So in adult books, in adult novels, there tends to be commercial novels and literary novels. Now, some people may disagree with what I'm saying here, but this is pretty typical. A commercial novel is what we call a genre novel. It's a mass market novel. It's typically the kind of novel you're going to find at Kroger or in the airport or something like that. It's a mass market. It's designed so many people will read it. It may be hardback. Oftentimes they're in paperback. The most popular genres are romance and mystery. Romance by far is the most sold kind of novel. Mystery is close behind it. Those are genre novels because they're specifically designed with I hate to say a cookie cutter, but they have expectations. In a mystery, there's certain expectations. In a romance, there's certain expectations. In a horror, or thriller, all these kinds of things. If you look into them, you have to have this, 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 and this, and that makes it a mystery novel. So that's what a genre novel is. Now you have a literary novel. These tend to come out as hardbacks. They tend to be more intellectual or depth, have more depth of thought to them. They have less story and more character oriented. So a lot of times it's sort of a following a character who has issues, and it follows them along in their life. And they're not necessarily a beginning, a middle, and an end like there would be with a genre novel. It's just sort of a vignette of their life. That's I'm not saying all literary novels are like that, but that is very typical. We were at a conference one time, and there was a literary author and a commercial author sitting, and somebody asked the question, what's the difference between a commercial novel and a literary novel? Literary novelists had all these glowing things about what a literary novel was and everything. And then the commercial author who'd written over 100 novels said, in commercial novels, they pay you in money. In literary novels, they pay you in copies. Because literary novels, now there are some literary novels that make a lot of money, but by and large, literary novels make authors less money. That's just what he means. All right, let's go to the next one. I'm not trying to get you not to do a literary novel, because those are the ones that win awards. You know, if you're going to win the Pulitzer or anything like that, it's going to be a literary novel. So it's very prestigious to write literary novels. All right, let's see. So getting fiction published. Now, when you get fiction published, you have to write the entire book, and this is going to be different for nonfiction in just a little bit. And I'll try to keep track of time here. So you have to write the entire book. There are a limited number of publishers who will take unsolicited submissions. And what I mean by that is I write a novel and I want to sell it to a publisher. Well, most publishers will not look at it. You have to have an agent. So it has to have what's called an agent submission. That means instead of submitting to a publisher, you have to submit to an agent, and then the agent submits to the publisher. That's how most work. Now, some don't, but there are probably 5 or 10% that allow you to make direct submissions. That means you probably have to get an agent. So the big question is, how do you get an agent? And there's several ways to do it. The first is with a query letter, and which I'm going to talk about a little bit more in just a minute. But in general, getting an agent means that you have to do several things, or possibly several things. One, I mentioned there were conferences. You go to a conference, you hear them speak, and you come up and say, hey, my name is Alan Elliott. You know, I'm writing mystery novels and blah, 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 blah. And my mystery novel is, and you give a 30-second, what's called a pitch. And they say, oh, that sounds interesting. Why don't you, here's my card. Why don't you send it to this address and say this in the subject line, and that will get you past the, it'll give you sort of the secret pass to get it to me. Or you can meet them through the media. I have had 3 agents. One I met at a conference, one I got through social media, and that means you're active on Twitter or something like that. There's something called pitch sessions, which I don't have time to go into, but if you just look up pitch sessions, you'll find out what that is. But it basically, you give a little blurb about your book on Twitter, and if somebody likes it, then you've made a contact. You have another author recommend you to an agent, or you could send what I call a cold query. That's just a letter you send to an agent, and it goes into typically what's called the slush pile, which means agents get 30, 40, sometimes 50 letters a day, and they have people making $12 an hour who are reading those. And if one looks interesting, then they pass it on. So out of 1,000, they might pass along 3 or 4 of them to the agent to read. So that's the slush pile. It's hard to get out of the slush pile. All right, so let's look at a query letter then. So what is a query letter? Because a lot of people use the query letter. That's how you get into whether it's an agent or a publisher. It's a brief professional letter that allows people to know something about your story. First, you have to pitch your story or tell what the hook is to your story. You have to tell them a little bit about you, and you have to tell them a little bit about why I'm the person to write this book, a little bit about your accomplishments. And one author said, summarized it by saying, you describe the hook, the book, and the cook. The hook is why you want to read it. The book is what the book is about, and the cook is you. So the hook, the book, and the cook. Thank you. All right, so where do you send your query letter? I mentioned the slush pile, and unfortunately, sometimes that's the only option you have. And so you send your letter to, first of all, you have to identify agents. Who represents books of your kind. Like if I'm writing mysteries, then I'm going to look in maybe the book called Writer's Marketplace, I think is the name of it. And it'll have lists of agents in there, and it'll say, I represent mysteries and thrillers. Okay, well now you know that's somebody interested in a mystery. So if you're writing a mystery, query them. If they're only interested in romance, you don't pitch them a mystery. So you can sort of identify agents like that. You look at their submission guidelines. If you go to almost any agent page, they're going to have a button called submissions. And on that they're going to have submission guidelines. These are the kinds of books I'm looking for. Send me these kind of books. Don't send me these kind of books. So don't waste your time if you have one they're not interested in. They will have guidelines. You have to follow those to the letter, because agents are looking for a reason to dismiss you, to say, I'm not, again, they get 30, 40, 50 a day. They're looking for some little thing to say, I don't, this person didn't follow my guidelines. So you really need to follow those guidelines to the letter. If you meet an agent at a conference, as I said, they may give you a secret way to pass by the slush pile and get quicker to them. Another program that I use is called Query Tracker. If you go to querytracker.com, it's a software program. It's free to use, or you can buy a subscription and get more use out of it. But basically, one of the things you can do there is it has a list of all agents who are accepting submissions, and you can choose on agents, and then you can say on the side, say, what kind of book are you looking for? Mysteries. So I can have, maybe it has 1,000 agents. I say, give me only those that are interested in mysteries. Now I'm down at 500. Now I want those who are only interested in murder mysteries or some other, there's about 30 different varieties of mysteries, unfortunately. So you can drill down and get to ones that may be of interest to you. So Query Tracker, that's one place to go. So here is what a query letter sort of looks like. Now I realize you can't read this, but nevertheless, it's just a letter. It's a typically one page letter that, as I said, gives a hook. This one says, I'm querying you because I think you would enjoy my picture book called Maximilian Villainous. Maximilian Villainous is unlike anyone in the family. While villainous family members commit crimes like stealing Santa's sleigh and swiping Mother Nature's power, Max is more focused on helping their victims. So that's the hook, whether it's good or bad, I don't know. And then, so a little bit more about the book and who you are, and that's what a query letter is. So you have to get them with a hook and why you should write this book. And then they might come back and say, hey, that sounds interesting. Send me the whole book, or send me the first 50 pages or something like that. All right, so let's go to organizations then. I mentioned some organizations, but no matter what kind of writer you are, there is a organization for you. Now, DOG is a general writers organization. We have mystery writers here, we have children's writers, and today I'm giving you general information. So DOG is a general writers group, and there's a lot of those, but there's also some specific ones. The largest writers group in the world is called Romance Writers of America. There are more romance novels than anything else out there, and so it's natural that there's thousands and thousands of romance writers. The next one would be Mystery Writers of America. Lots of mysteries. You go into Kroger or someplace that has books, you're going to see a lot of romance, a lot of mysteries. Then you're also going to see horror and other kinds of genres. I mentioned the SCBWI for children's books. There's also the ACFW, which is the American Christian Fiction Writers, and they have their own conferences as well. So just look up, if you're a writer of mystery, well, mystery's already up there, but if you're a writer of horror, go to Google and say Horror Writers Group or something like that, and you'll probably find one. All right, so Another thing, go back one, I think this is number 25, should be called professional help, or did I skip one here? Let me look. Oh, no, you're, okay, yeah, the one that says plus. Okay, you're right. Plus other organizations like DOG. I mentioned a critique group, which is very helpful. Online networks. I'm a member of some of these, like there's something called the 12 by 12 challenge, which is a group of people who come together, and the whole idea is to write 12 picture books in 12 months. So, and there's I don't know, 1,000 people who are a member of that, and we support each other and things like that. There's also something called NaNoWriMo, which I think is in November. Has anybody participated in that? You have? And the whole idea there is to write a novel in a month. And so again, there's people out there supporting you, giving you ideas and things like that. And there also, as I mentioned, also there's these Twitter pitch fests. And what that is again, you put a hook or a pitch out there on Twitter with a particular hashtag, and then editors or agents are looking at that for one day. Typically it's 8 to 8 in one day. If they like it, they're going to tell you, and then you have a connection. And so again, you can break through the slush pile, and that will be helpful. So there's lots of things like that. You don't know these things unless you typically get into some writers group that tells you about them. All right, so there's also professional help. And I again would recommend this, well, I would say particularly for novels, but really anything that are available for costs. There are professional critiquers. There's one called ratemystory.com. For picture books. You pay them a yearly fee and you get 18 critiques. You send them the story, and somebody who is a picture book writer critiques your story and sends back their critique. It's very helpful. There's also editors for hire. Laurie, if you're out there, I'll tell about you. Laurie is a professional editor who is often at our DOG group. And if you need someone to edit your novel, she would certainly be a great person to do that. There are a lot of people out there who are professional writers. You want to choose somebody who's had, a dozen books printed or a dozen books published, so that that they know what they're talking about. But they will do things. There's also so editing is more than just, hey, let me read your book. There's many kinds of editing, and I'll mention 4. There's copy editing, which goes through it word by word, looks at the grammar and everything, spelling, that kind of thing. There's line editing, which looks at ideas and transitions. Is your tone correct? Are you making sense of your sentences? There's also something called a developmental editor, and they look at your story structure. You don't have a very good beginning. You need to do better. You need to flesh out this scene, things like that. And you also have proofreaders and this proofreader is typically the last thing you do. And that is somebody who goes through there and says, hey, you need a comma here, and that word is misspelled and things like that. So those are typically available at a price, unless you're a member of a critique group. Sometimes people will do that for you because you're a member of a critique group. All right, now let's move on to nonfiction. So again, fiction is pretend. You make up the story, and nonfiction is for real, or about real facts. So nonfiction is a book. Go ahead, Wesley. Nonfiction is a book based on facts. And again, they are broken down into several areas. You have biographies about a specific person. One that probably everyone has heard of is A Beautiful Mind. You have memoirs, which are typically your story. So if you're writing the story about you or your grandparents or something like that, you're writing a memoir, typically. There are also how-to books. I've written a number of how-to books. I don't have any up here, but a lot of computer books that I've written are how-to books. And you've seen the Dummy series is a how-to book. How do you use Windows? How do you use PageMaker? Things like that. Or how do you crochet? There are so many how-to books out there. And let me tell you right now, a how-to book is one of the best, and I hate to say easiest, but you can often get into a publisher with a how-to book if you have an expertise at that, because people buy how-to books. If you're going to be a quilter, what's the first thing people tend to do? They may go online, but they're probably going to go to Barnes and Noble and buy a quilting book. And so they're very popular. There's also travel and academic and journalism kind of things, which are nonfiction. So I've written a few nonfiction books. There's 4 of them. You'll notice there's a range here. The Texas Ingenuity book, which I happen to have here, is about people in Texas who invented something, or they became famous for some reason. So all sorts of Texas thingies there. There's some computer books, IBM SPSS. There's Daily Dose of the American Dream, which is, again, is a one-a-day kind of biography of people who have invented things or have created something very interesting. So let's go to the next one. So why would you want to write nonfiction? I mentioned how-to books. Do you realize that 87% of the books published every year are nonfiction? So if you use those odds, it's probably easier to get a nonfiction book published than a fiction book. That's out of 50 or 60,000 books a year. So you can see how many nonfiction books are there. So you typically have a better chance than fiction. Plus, for nonfiction, you usually don't have to have an agent. Nonfiction is so popular that a lot of publishers who won't let you submit a fiction book will let you submit a nonfiction book. You just have to go to their website, go to the publisher website, look for submissions and see. In fiction, you're expected to have the whole book written, because if they're interested in the book, they want to say, okay, send me the entire novel. So you have to send it to them. For a nonfiction book, you have to do something called typically one chapter plus a proposal. I'm actually working on a proposal. I sent one this week for a book that I'm working on. And the proposal is like a 10-page marketing document. So what is this book about? Who would be interested in buying this book? What are some similar books to this? So it's page after page of why this publisher would want to write. What is my, how am I going to market it? What's my platform? Why are people going to think I'm an expert at this, and so forth and so on. And then you write one chapter. So they want to see that you know how to write. What they're really interested in is this going to be a book that people are going to be interested in? Because people, again, buy books, nonfiction books, because they're about something and they're pretty well written. So that's what they're interested in there. There's probably less, what do I say here? Less risk of writing. So there's less risk in writing a nonfiction book. You don't have to write the whole book. So I've written several proposals that never got off, never did anything with, but all I had to do is write one chapter. So, 10,000 words rather than 30, 50, 60, 70, 80,000 words. So it makes a whole lot of difference. All right, next one is fiction versus nonfiction. So I mentioned, so here's some differences here. People buy fiction for pleasure typically, and they buy nonfiction because of need. A lot of my computer books, are because a person has a piece of software, they need to know how to use it. Manuals tend to be crummy, so they buy extra books that are more readable, that teach them how to do it. Fiction is typically short-lived. A romance novel typically stays on the shelf for 6 weeks, and then it's gone. And so the romance writers I've known oftentimes have to write 6 to 12 books a year. That's a lot of writing. They tend to be relatively short. They tend to be somewhat formulaic, but they don't last very long. Unless you're a very famous writer, then they would last for a while. A nonfiction book can last for decades. If you write a book about some interesting topic, like how to quilt, for instance, it's not going to change that much over the next decade, and so it'll probably stay around for a while. However, interestingly enough, 45% of all the books purchased are fiction. So you have 87% of the books published are nonfiction, but 45% of the books purchased are nonfiction, are fiction. So if you get into fiction, you may have a little bit better chance of selling more. Depends on what you're doing. The popularity of what you do. I wrote some books a long time ago about Norton Utilities. Most of you have heard of that. So it was a really popular book. And so it sold really good and so that one produced a lot of sales. Whereas a book about a software program for statistics, 1,000 or so would be a great sales. All right, so how do you start? Again, looking at time, I don't want to go too far over. First, you have to sharpen your idea. So go ahead to the next one. How can you, so again, I brought this up earlier, but how can you slant your idea to fit into a category that is being published today? So if there's a lot of books about quilting out there, you have to come up with some idea how to quilt using old t-shirts or something. That would be an interesting book maybe, or how to quilt using some other weird kind of fabric. So you have to slant it. So oftentimes, particularly if it's a subject out there where there's already 100 books, you have to come out with something that's sort of interesting. So what publishers are going to be interested in these books? Instead of here's another example, instead of a general book about finances, how about a book about finances for a recently divorced woman? Okay, so now you're getting to a niche market, a targeted market. So that's what you want to look at typically, particularly if you're a beginning writer. Okay, the next one is a really good book. So if you're interested in writing nonfiction, I would encourage you to read this next book that's fixing to come up. It's called Damn, Why Didn't I Write That? And if you go through this book, this guy I think had a high school education, and yet he's written a number of books in which he's made well over $100,000 for each book. They're all nonfiction books, and they're books that you wouldn't think, like I think he wrote books about how people spoke in the 1700s. It's really talking about a niche book. So he wrote books like that really sell a lot, because if you want that, guess what you're going to buy? You're going to buy that book. If you're writing maybe a novel about that's set in the 1700s, or you're doing research, you want that book. So that's a good book to read and get ideas from. All right, so you have to, if you're writing nonfiction, you have to do research, and you have to know what's the competition, how much time are you going to be willing to spend on research or money. I'm working on a particular book. I took a trip to London and look at their archives of some things that were published or newspapers back in the 1800s, because I was doing a particular book. So you may need to go someplace and get to the real place and find out some stuff maybe other people don't know. Are you willing to promote your book once you've written it? And do you have a platform, or can you create a platform? In other words, if I'm going to write a book about quilting, maybe I should create a website about, Alan's Quilting World or something like that, and begin to have followers. Once I have 5,000 followers, then the publisher is going to say, hey, maybe half of those people would buy a book. That's a pretty good start. All right, so I mentioned that when you write a nonfiction book, you typically write a sample chapter. You also have to have an outline. So you write the one chapter, then you outline all the rest of the chapters. Typically 1 to 5 paragraphs per chapter explaining what's going to be about. You might write a magazine article, again, to make sure you're known as an expert. And let's go to the next one, writing a sample chapter. So it doesn't have to be the first chapter, although it typically is. You want to write that chapter as if it were, as I would say, plucked out of your book. So it needs to be a finished, polished chapter, as if typically the first chapter, because you want people to be really interested in what you're going to write. You want to have some real insights on how to improve whatever you're going to talk about, so that, again, it'll have some sort of slant to it that people are interested in. It also typically sets the pattern for the rest of the book. So the publisher is going to read that first chapter and either say, oh yeah, this guy knows how to write, or this stinks and I don't want the rest of the book. I wouldn't want to read the rest of the book. Also, I mentioned there at the end, for nonfiction, you typically have to, and again, I'm off camera, but have to, you might have photographs and things. This book is 127 pages of photographs, and we had to procure somehow and get all these photographs. Some of them we had to get permission to use. So oftentimes in a nonfiction book, that's an added thing most people don't think about, is if you're going to use photographs, you have to get somebody's permission to use them. All right. Finally, you have to develop an outline. Let's see, I guess they've already covered that. Yeah, so let's go on to the next one. So now you're almost ready for a proposal. No, not that kind of proposal. This kind of proposal. So these are 3 books about writing book proposals for nonfiction books. And then go ahead and continue. I'm going to skip over this slightly because I'm getting a little bit out of time. But your proposal, I'm going to go through these really quickly. Next one, how does your idea compare to other bestsellers? Creating an effective pitch, examples of a pitch, You want to write the cover flap. You know, oftentimes you go into a book and there's a cover flap. That's what people tend to read when they're going to buy your book. You write that. Again, that's part of your sales stuff. You have to decide whether you're going to query or propose. Query is when you write a letter and say, I have this idea. Propose is when you actually submit the entire proposal. Again, read those books. It'll tell you about that. Continue on until you get to the query letter. There you go. So a query letter, again, as I say, is a single letter. And then the next one is assemble your proposal. So you can see that there's typically several things. You have a title. It's like writing something for high school. You know, you have a title page, an overview, an author bio, selling points, your table of contents, and a sample chapter. That is typically what it would look like. Next one shows you, there's the sort of the beginning of one, and the next page shows you each item typically is one page. From what I understand, what happens is if they're interested in your book, let's say it's a 10-page proposal, they're going to rip it apart and give the marketing part to the marketing people. They're going to give one part to some other, and they're going to all look at your book, and then they come together and discuss it. So each section needs to stand alone. Okay, improving your chances. Again, become an expert, and I won't go through a lot of those. Get your name known, create a platform. Okay, let's go to self-publishing. And again, sorry that a lot of this is an overview, but I'm going to do the best I can here. So why would you want to self-publish? So the people I know who have self-published and it's been successful have either had a solid platform, a solid platform where you can sell your own books. You have the money and time and energy to self-promote. And this might be a better way for you. So let me just go back and explain those a little bit. A solid platform means that you have a way to sell your books. Let's say you're a motivational speaker and you go speak and there's 1,000 people there. Then you have a bookstore at the back and you want to have a couple of books, because if you're a motivational speaker and you're pretty good at it, people are going to come and want to come and buy your books and find out more. Or let's say you're a legal scholar about, you know, how to handle tax ramifications of nonprofit organizations, and you go to a conference and you speak about that. You want to have books that you sell. That is your own platform. That's what I mean by that. Or you go to a conference about quilters and you talk about how to make quilts out of t-shirts, and you have a book about that, and then they buy that book. So if you have that kind of platform, then you have the ability possibly to make a lot of money on a self-published book. Because typically, as I'm going to show you, if you have a platform and you can sell your books, you can make more money per book from a self-published book, but it is harder to sell a self-published book. So we'll see the trade-offs there. Also, you have the time and money and energy. Now I know, basically I've been talking about nonfiction there, but I know somebody who was a fiction writer, and she, with her own money, set up a book signing tour of the South, and she went to 100 different bookstores before the pandemic. And she went on, you know, she contacted radio stations and she really self-promoted, and she sold thousands of books. But she had the time and money and energy to do that. So you have to be able to do something like that. Now there's a caveat here. These used to be in every magazine, and now you see them on the internet. We want to publish your book. If you see something that says we want to publish your book, don't believe it. They want you to pay to publish your book. These are vanity presses, and what they do is they're going to charge you a lot of money to publish your book. Now they're not going to bill it like that. They're going to say, send us your book, and if we think it's going to make a lot of money, then we'll work with you to publish that book. Well, yeah, but they're going to charge you $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $10,000, $20,000. I went to a conference recently, or I went to a Santa Claus convention a couple of years ago, and I was selling this book, which was very popular. And so another person had their Christmas book, and she came to me and looked through my, oh, that's such a great book. It's such a, you know, how did you find the illustrator? Well, I didn't find the illustrator. You know, the publisher did. Oh, how much did you have to pay to get your book published? Mine cost $20,000. And I said, they paid me, you know, so that's the difference between, so she's going to have to sell a whole lot of books to make up that $20,000, let me just say. So that's sort of the difference. If you have a platform, on the other hand, I'm going to show you in a minute, well, I'll get to it. So if you go to the next ones, I have self-published some books. One of them's up here called Angels Love Donuts. It's a book about a movie that I was involved in. And also this is a book about this church, the 100th anniversary of this church. So there were some platforms that I had to sell those books. And so that's why those were fairly legitimate. Now let me go to the next one and talk about this one book, and I don't have it up here, but I sold 60,000 copies of this book. It took 25 years. And this one here happens to be like the 6th edition. There were 8 editions total. So I sold a lot of these books, but it cost a lot of money to sell these. They were books associated with a software program, but it cost lots and lots of money. You know, sometimes I spent $90,000 in a year and sold $100,000 worth of books. Well, first of all, it took a lot of time to do that. And you can see that I could say, well, I sold $1 million worth of this book, but I didn't make anywhere near $1 million, you know. But I did have a platform, and we took some nice Disney trips off of the money I made from this book. But nevertheless, I had a platform where I could sell this book. All right, let's go to the next one. So in self-publishing, you do the work. So in traditional publishing, again, I sent them the words to this. They chose the illustrator. They had a cover artist work with the illustrator on the cover. They helped with the jacket copy. They arranged for the printer to print it. Everything. All I did was I waited until a box came and there were a bunch of books in it. That's all I did. So that was traditional publishing. Now, self-publishing, you write the book, you have to make sure it's edited. So, you know, pay someone. Oh, I don't know if you've read very many self-published books, but I have to tell you, some of them are great. Some of them are horrible because they didn't have anybody edit their book. And so it's almost embarrassing to read it. So have it edited. You need to have it formatted to fit the book. So this is a self-published book that Dog did, and we had how long did it take us to make sure that the format worked here, Catherine? How many months did it take? A long time to make sure it was going to fit in there. So that's not a trivial thing. We had to have someone design the cover. Now, fortunately, we had an artist who agreed to design the cover for us, and that nice cover. We were really pleased with the cover. A professional artist did that. You have to either choose an ISBN number, or what is that? That's the little barcode on the back. You have to either pay for that yourself, or somehow a printer will get one for you. And there's some ramifications about who owns it and all that sort of stuff. You have to find a printer or publisher. Amazon, there were some questions about, should I use Amazon? I've used Amazon for a couple of things. Actually, we used Amazon for this. The Angels Love Donuts, we used Amazon for. This one, there was a publisher in Canada that we used to do this one. So it just depends. It's different for every book. I can't say Amazon is always the right way. There are good and bad things about Amazon. If you publish it in Amazon, you know, it'll be ready for people to buy tomorrow if you have everything put together. And a lot of people have made a lot of money off of that. There are other ways to do it as well. Some people don't like Amazon because they think they own too much of your book. You do all the promotion. So just by putting it on, you know how many millions of books there are on Amazon? How is anybody going to find your book? You have to promote it either through, typically nowadays it's through social media.
Mom?
You have to somehow rise above the crowd and get people to notice your book, which is not easy to do. A self-published book is hard to get in the libraries, not impossible, but hard, and in bookstores. A lot of times bookstores don't want to carry your books because they don't, self-published books, because they don't make as much money off of them. And again, unless you're maybe a local, a lot of times the ones that get into a bookstore are local publishers who have some relationship with the bookstore, but you're not going to get your bookstore, you're not going to get a bookstore in Seattle to carry your book, most likely, very rarely. Now, the good thing is you make more per money, you make more per book. So if you have self-published your book, and let's say you pay, somehow you've paid off the $20,000, then every time you sell a book now, you make a lot more money. If, you know, when this book is sold, I make $1, $1.50 or something, you know, so it's not a whole lot. So I have to hopefully that they're going to sell a whole lot of books. But if I own the book totally and I sell it myself, then I might make $15 off of it. Or if I sell it to a bookstore, I might make $5 off of it or something like that. So you might make more that way. Okay, next one is warnings. There are a lot of publishers out there who offer to publish your book, but they are really making, they're making their money from you instead of for you. If a publisher says, hey, we want to publish your book and it'll only cost you, no, that's it. They're a vanity publisher. They're going to try to soak as much money out of you as possible. So just be aware of that. Okay, let's see. Please do not hold the microphone at the bottom. Oh, okay. Heck of a time now. Okay. So if a publisher charges you anything, watch out for them. It can easily cost you $5,000 to $20,000 to get a book published through a vanity press. I've known people, as I said, I knew the one lady who paid $20,000. $5,000 is not unusual. But they are slick and persuasive. So I just went out there a couple of days ago and did a search on publishers and came up with this one here. This one is called Northwestern Publishing House. Manuscript in our submission sidelines. It looks exactly like a legitimate publisher. Exactly. They're gonna we want submit your book and we will evaluate it and tell you if it's a good book. But just be aware, do a search on the name, and oftentimes you'll find out whether they're, people will put reviews or something out there that this was a vanity press or something like that. Just be aware of, particularly if they say, we will work with you somehow, or, we will find editors for you or something like that. What they're saying is they're gonna give you services that you're then gonna pay for. Those and again, you might do that. Some people, who does that? So I do know some people who do that. Let's say you're an executive and you are a motivational speaker. You don't have time to do all this stuff, but you know that you can sell your book once you get it. So you may pay somebody $5,000 or $20,000 to ghostwrite your book, or edit your book and do all the work to get that book published, but it's still going to be your book because you're going to make a ton of money off of it by selling it. So there are some reasons why you would want to do vanity press, but again, you have to have the platform in order to be able to make the money that it costs. Okay, let's say, so here's self-publishing finances. Let's say your book, you price your book at $10. Now that's low probably, but let's say you do. If you used Amazon to publish your book, it will cost you about $4.50 to buy that book. So if I had this published by Amazon and I wanted to buy some copies to sell tonight, I would have to pay them $4.50 per book. So I would make $5.50 every time I sold one if I sold it for $10. That's great. For bookstores, however, I used to be a bookstore manager. They usually want about 60% off. So if it's a $10 book, they're going to want you to sell it to them for $4. So they can make their money. They want 60% off. That's just what they want. Sometimes 50, but sometimes 60. So you'll have to sell them to them for $4 each. Well, you have to pay $4.50 each. So that doesn't work out very well. So that's a caveat there. Well, you say, okay, I'll just sell it for $15. And now you'll sell it to them for $6 and then you can make some money off of it. So you have to do the math here. And that's why a lot of times bookstores don't want to sell your book, because in order for you to make money, you have to raise the price so high that the competition is a lot cheaper than you. So just be aware of that. However, if you sell the book online, if somebody buys it online, then you may make your $5.50 each because you don't have to do anything. Amazon publishers prints your book and mails it to whoever, and they charge you 40% or something like that. So you make a bunch of money. So there's a give and take in that. And so you just have to weigh how you're going to do it. Now, the next slide has to do a little bit with the dog book, and Patsy and Catherine may help me with this. But these are the things we had to had to be concerned about. We had to enter the content in Word, and as I said, it took about 4 or 5 months to get it all edited and where we wanted it. We had to format it right so that it fit the page correctly. It looked like a good book, which is very specific. You have to deal with eighths of an inch here and there and all this sort of stuff. We had to create the cover artwork. Fortunately, we had a artist who knew how to help us do that. You have to make sure that the spine matches the number of pages. So, we had to make sure we knew there was going to be 380 pages and how wide 380 pages were going to be for the spine to fit. So there's all sorts of little things like that. We had to get a proof and make sure it looked right. And when we first got it, the spine was off. So we had to deal with that. And then you have to sell them. Fortunately, we had a platform. It's you and the people who wrote that. So we sell that through Dog. And if you don't know what this is short stories written by people from Dog. And so it's a very, very good book. So I encourage you to buy one, $15. Okay, let's go to the next one. So successful self-publishing. So these are reasons you would do self-publishing. One, you're doing it for your family. I have a friend right now who is writing a book so that his grandkids will know who he is. Okay, he is writing it for his family. He doesn't expect to sell 1,000 copies. He expects to get 20 or 30 copies made. So that is one reason you might want to do self-publishing. You have the time and money to self-promote, which I've already mentioned. You have a platform that will allow you to sell your books to people. For instance, you're a speaker. You have a product to sell that the book goes with. You have a company, organization, et cetera, that will promote the book. If you own Dr. Pepper and you're going to want to have a book called The History of Dr. Pepper and you're going to pay somebody $20,000 to write it, now you have a book that you can sell through your Dr. Pepper network. That's what I mean. All right, so if you want to go through, there's a lot of resources for self-publishing. And I just mentioned a few here. The Alliance of Independent Authors. Remember, I said there was an organization for everything. Well, there's one for self-publishing, several. Self-Publishing Success Summit, which is a good one. The Author 2.0 Blueprint and Successful Self-Publishing, 99 Designs, which helps you do a cover. The Author Marketing Club, and Draft to Digital, which helps you go from your Word document all the way to your digital document. All right, so again, these were bird's eye views. I hit a lot of things about publishing that hopefully will or at least give you some insight as to where you would go from here. I didn't have time to drill down into the details, but I think if you follow the things that I've mentioned, then I think you'll find that you will have some luck at getting yours published. So good luck with whatever you're going to do.
So there you have it. I hope you got something out of this talk. And if you did, get out there and get to work. And I'd love to see your book sometime. Give me a comment and tell me what you're writing. Here are some of my books that are for sale and a website where you can go to find them. But now it's your turn. So get out there, work, and get published. Thanks.